Hello everyone, this is Dr. BKJV coming back with another video. This time, this video is a video in response to Dr. William Lane Craig. He is a Christian theologian and philosopher that I greatly admire. I love his work, I love his books, but I strongly disagree with him when it comes to biological evolution. Namely, he believes that biblical Christianity and evolution are compatible. I completely disagree. And this video I'm going to talk about why. There's many other reasons why evolution and Christianity do not mesh. I've seen other Christians talk about those points. I'm not talking about that. I'm only going to talk about one point, and that is based on Romans chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. But anyway, let's get into this. Dr. William Lane Craig posted a video talking about, I'll put a link here, I'll put it somewhere in the description, talking about how the neo-Darwinian synthesis or neo-Darwinian evolution is compatible with Christianity, that natural selection and random mutations could be framed into a Christian belief. Now, I disagree. I do agree that evolution is compatible with the concept of a generic God, with generic theism, with deism, but the Bible and the authors of the Bible would disagree. So I don't think it's compatible with Christianity. Obviously, God could have programmed the universe so that life could arise by natural means, but we're not talking about what God could possibly do. We're talking about what God says he did in the Bible. And could have God used mutations? Could he have guided mutations to get to some future goal? Of course he could. He could do anything he wants. He's God. So there's nothing logically incompatible with the existence of God or his creation. I just think clearly from the Bible that it is not compatible with Christianity. Having said that, evolution is non-goal related or goal orientated. So that's why right off the bat, I disagree. Now, let's get into this. This is Romans 1, verse 19 through 20, which reads, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Notice here the Bible says that people could be shown by God what may be known of God. It says that in verse 19, what may be known of God. People could see that. They're shown it. That's verse 19. It's not talking about the faith part. The faith part is separate. It's spoken about in all over the Bible in verse 17. But here's talking about what's clear, what could be shown of God. So God can be shown and known. How can people know that God exists according to the Bible, according to these verses? Well, verse 20 says it all. It says, "For the invisible things of him." So yes, he's invisible. The Bible writers know this. "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen." You could see them. "Being understood by the things that are made." You could understand it just by looking at what's made. And that way you could deduce, without an excuse, that God exists. And therefore, you could be strongly convinced with that alone, by what you're seeing. So, the question is, what is it that God made that people can clearly see that would leave them without an excuse of disbelief in God's existence? What is it? Is it the ontological argument? Is it the fine-tuning argument? Is it the Leibnizian contingency argument? Is it the Kalam cosmological argument? Is it the moral argument that they could see? Is it the applicability of mathematics argument? No. None of that is what God made that could be clearly seen. The most complex integrated machinery that God made is life, biological organisms that can be seen and reduced rationally to have been designed by a creator and not by natural, godless processes. It is not by natural processes, because otherwise people would have an excuse, contrary to verse 20 of Romans 1. An illustration. If aliens existed and you wanted to show them concrete, drop-dead evidence that there was intelligent life on Earth, you may hand them an iPhone Pro Max. Show it to them, show them how it works, its functions. That way, you would leave them without excuse in thinking that there is no strong evidence of intelligent life on Earth. You just show them something. Something that was made and clearly seen. But what if it turned out that there was actually a natural process that made electronics and iPhones by natural means? They would have a definite excuse to distrust that human intelligence made that. Why wouldn't they distrust it? They're seeing that it could be made. That way, they could reasonably conclude that humans did not make it actually, but rather that natural processes involving gravity, electromagnetism, etc., maybe that built it naturally. So natural built electronic complexity came by nature. Similarly, if there is a natural process that makes the most outstanding complexity ever seen, aka biological life, then people would have an excuse to think that nobody made it. No intelligence needed. Why? Well, look at the dirt, give it some time and water, and life just comes out. But that's not what God tells us. He wants us to know that his eternal power and Godhead are clearly seen by the things that are made. So clear that it leaves people without an excuse for disbelief. Verse 20. I can tell you that I've talked to people and evolution has given them a huge excuse in thinking that the world and biological life came by itself. They think and say something like this. Well, there's nothing to see here. See? Dirt, water, millions of years, and random mutation. So why would I assume God did it? It is a God substitute. But if evolution was true, it would leave a whole world with a major excuse. Why? The most complex thing I can see with my eyes made itself by natural means. The result of believing this false theory, evolution, has created much more atheism than before in academia at an alarming rate since Darwin. Now, according to Richard Dawkins, he's a famous biologist, famous atheist biologist, wrote a lot of popular books. In one of his books, though, The Blind Watchmaker, he writes, quote, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Well, why is that? Because people before Darwin would, generally speaking, look at life and say, wow, look what the designer did, look what God did. But, and then the atheists would say, well, there were atheists back then, but they would say, hey, I don't believe in God, but man, you Christians have a good point. These complicated organisms, these dogs, these cats, these horses, the humans, yeah, I see you have a good point there, but I don't know what to say about it. It looks designed, you're right. But now, thanks to Darwin, again, that's why Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. As the anti-ID theorists, aka evolutionary biologists, would say, we cannot detect design in nature, in biology. And this argument that, well, God could have done that natural thing is very post hoc, meaning very after the fact. In other words, you could be using that same argument to talk about other things. The wind, or how this paper fell from my hand. Well, actually, God did it, and that's proof of God. Yeah. You could say that because in the end, you could say God allowed me or caused me to drop that, something like that. But it's not true evidence. It's just something that would be unfalsifiable for my part. So you could always insert God into any natural process with that kind of mentality. But no, God wanted it to be clearly seen. He didn't want us to have an excuse of any type. And again, that is Romans 1, verse 19 through 20. Foreseen objection is that Romans 1 applies to the end result, not the mechanism or the method of design. Romans 1 is talking about design detection of the end product, regardless of the method of how it was designed. That would be the argument against my point. Now, the problem with that argument or with that objection is that we are no longer talking about Darwinian evolution in that case, nor theistic evolution, atheistic or theistic evolution, because the whole purpose of evolution came to show us how natural processes created life. The whole concept of the design detection is intelligent design science. It is not evolution. It's the antithesis, or what evolutionary biologists, theistic or atheistic, have been fighting against this whole time. Namely, organizations like BioLogos. They don't talk about design detection, quite the opposite. They say that design detection is false, that you cannot see that. That remember, we have this blind watchmaker. We have to remember that the whole concept of design detection, or Paley's watchmaker analogy, where if you find a watch, you could obviously deduce that there was a watchmaker, that was reasonable before Darwin, even according to Darwin. That's exactly what Darwin's mechanism, what evolution came to supplant, to remove. So before Darwin, you could argue, doesn't matter how God made it, obviously he made it. Well, after Darwin, he removed that. Let me show you what I mean by reading a quote from Charles Darwin's own autobiography. It reads, "The old argument from design in nature, as given by Paley, which formerly seemed to be so conclusive, fails now that the law of natural selection has been discovered. There seems to be no more design in the variability of organic beings and in the action of natural selection than in the course which the wind blows." So, from Darwin's own view, from his own mouth, there's as much design that you could detect, that you could see in the wind blowing as in evolutionary biology, in life forms, in biological structures. Now, the problem with making the argument that God guided this unguided process of evolution, or that God was somehow in control of this natural process, that's what, therefore, God did make it. The problem with just inserting God into this natural process is that would be an unfalsifiable claim. In the end, you can make that argument about anything. You can make that argument, as I mentioned, about paper falling down, the wind blowing. Now you're adding evolution when there's a natural mechanism behind it. Now, let's give you a really good example. Here it goes. Let's say that we found out that there was proof that Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead. But here's the catch. That turns out there was a natural explanation. Which one? Well, Jesus rose from the dead, hypothetically speaking, according to the example, but it was because there were doctors there. They gave him epinephrine, they gave him some atropine, they gave him IV fluids, they gave him a blood transfusion, and after 3 days or 4 days or whatever, that's why he rose from the dead. Now, according to Paul, and what Christians would naturally conclude from there, would be that Christianity would be falsified. Why? Because you found the natural explanation of why Jesus was raised from the dead. Now, you could say, well, that's how God raised him from the dead. Nah, that would not fly. It does not fly. It does not go well when that evidence is supposed to convince you of God's existence. There's other things that God could guide that don't necessarily guide you to believe in God's existence. But things like the creation of life make us believe in God's existence, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead by a miraculous process is what make us believe on Jesus Christ. So, if they found that naturalistic explanation, it would be silly to say, well, that's how God did it. That was God's method. No, It depends on the context. So right there, it will be most reasonable to abandon the Christian belief, as Paul says. Now, another example. Now, Dr. Michael Behe, the biochemist, he talks a lot about the bacterial flagella with its little motor that spins, really awesome. Now, he, for example, if you could show him that flagellar motor could be generated naturally, even though he believes it was designed, if you could show it to him being made naturally, he would say, oh, I guess you're right. I guess no intelligent design is needed. Now, on the contrary, if Dr. Michael Behe were to say, yeah, well, you showed it that it came by naturally without a guiding hand, I still think it was designed. Well, he could choose to believe that unfalsifiable claim, but that's no longer something that's clearly seen from God to us. It's something that you just believe regardless of the facts. Now, in that example, Dr. Michael Behe would be reasonable to disbelieve in the design hypothesis of the flagellar motor because we just found out. Well, I guess our design detection was just that. It was just apparently designed, but it wasn't truly designed. Again, what Darwin or what evolutionary biology came to do, remove the design argument from our arsenal. Now, again, evolution has always been a design substitute. According to evolutionary biologists, before Darwin, it was reasonable to believe in intelligent design. But now, according to them, we found out that the design that we see in nature is an illusion. That's their theory. That's why, remember, Dawkins says that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled doubter of intelligent design, or God. What I would say to you fellow Christians is, do not compromise. Do not accept this false theory of life making itself just because the academia, just because the evolutionary biologists have told us so. Christians accepting Darwinian evolution into their own Bible or into their own mind is aching, in my opinion. It's similar to the following. Now, imagine for a second that creationist Christians took over the universities. They took over the peer-reviewed system. And then they all formed a consensus that they were teaching everybody. They would teach atheists and Christians. This was their consensus. They would say, we have now agreed upon that based on physics and the Kalam cosmological argument, we have concluded unanimously that indeed there is an beginning to the universe. Therefore, there is an all-powerful, all-knowing, spaceless, timeless, immaterial mind behind the universe, the moral lawgiver, and he is the judge. We have concluded that. And then the Christian academics tell this to the atheist students. Hey, don't worry, students. You could still believe in atheism. You could still be an atheist. You could still believe in your godless philosophy because technically, you don't have to call that spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful judge being of moral law. You don't have to call him God. He's not necessarily God, so you could still conclude that maybe it's some other entity. And then the atheist would say, okay, well, I guess since it's proven, I'll accept it. I, as an atheist, now believe in a timeless, spaceless, immaterial, supernatural, something beyond nature that is a moral lawgiver, but it's not God. And then, of course, the Christian academics would giggle. We got them to accept something that's obviously contradictory. That's how I would compare having the Darwinists convince Christians that life was made by itself over millions of years without a guiding hand by random mutation and natural selection. It's laughable. It's just like that. It's similar to my analogy. Now, Dr. William Lane Craig would suggest that we go to other arguments to prove God's existence, other arguments that he thinks are better, such as the contingency argument, the moral argument, the fine-tuning of the universe argument. Why? Well, because he believes, correctly, that many Christians in academia have been disarmed. They've been disarmed completely from the design argument in what? In biology. So he goes, hey, stop using the design argument in biology because that's been proven false through evolution. But he believes that physics and the fine-tuning has not found its Darwin. So he admits that Darwin has done a great disservice to biology and to what we clearly see through our eyes, thanks to Darwin. That's why he says, let's go to these other arguments, which, by the way, I believe them. I believe all other arguments that Dr. William and Craig believes in. I think those are solid arguments. I just think the most powerful argument is one that you could see with your own eyes. If fine-tuning has not found its Darwin, but if we say, well, but biology has its Darwin, well, what does that mean? Why else would Dr. Craig not want to use biology? Well, because there is a Darwin. Why does he want to use fine-tuning? Because there is no Darwin. That's why. Basically admitting indirectly that if there was a Darwin, we gotta change arguments. But I'm telling you, not in this video. There's no evidence, no proofs in this video that Darwinian evolution's a myth. I believe that firmly. Of course, there's plenty of other videos you could see for that. Maybe I'll make one in the future. If you have any questions about why evolution is not true, why I think it's fake, why it's a philosophically based scientific theory, let me know. This is not the video for that. Anyway, you have a good day and God bless you guys.